Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Folks, we're back for part 2 of my interview with Bill Conley and Bob Massa from Enrollment Intelligence Now. We'll pick up talking about what institutions can do in this new normal. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program. We had a great conversation last week about all the challenges. Now we're going to get into some of the solutions.
Can't wait. We're ready.
Yeah, and I do think, as we often say, it's not a problem to present problems. It's a problem when you don't bring solutions with it. So we're happy to tag on to what we talked about last week.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to get into starting with what can a college president do? Now,
that's the long game. What do you have to do to start trimming your sails for the realities of the different headwinds? But for the next class, a couple of things that as former practitioners, number one, set an achievable goal for 2026 enrollment. And that is going to be a story told by your last 3 to 5 year funnel data. What has been your actual enrollment? What application number and admit numbers generated that enrollment class? It really is staggering to me how many institutions know that they've been in a decline, but continue to say, well, next year it's going to be different. Let's set a higher target. So I think if you're going to earnestly fight against the headwinds, set an achievable target for 2026.
Yeah, no, I think that the next thing is to create and disseminate a core message that conveys the college's benefits and not, platitudes about the liberal arts. There's so much misinformation out there about, for example, discriminatory practices in higher education, whether it's DEI or anti-Semitism or transgender issues, whatever it is. I think it's important for colleges to be very, very clear about what they stand for and what they believe in. And this goes back to the mission. They also need to be very, very clear about price and cost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Comment or question along those lines. There has been so much information put out there, just like you said, Bob, on DEI, anti-Semitism, transgender, etc. Does it make sense from a marketing perspective to have things on your website from students talking about the climate, things like that, people that, prospective students can relate to?
No question about it. And again, as I said, the messages have to be genuine. They can't be Madison Avenue platitudes. And the best way to make them genuine is to have student voices and alumni voices in there. I mean, you can say that we're against all forms of discrimination. You can be very clear about that. But showing it is a different story. And I think that's more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and going for the enrollment leadership is when you've got that target class in mind, too many institutions don't pay attention to the dashboard, the performance in real time. And so when you set a target, you're going to have all these other targets going up. To get this enrollment, you need X admits. To get X admits, you need Y applicants. And I just tell our clients and anybody who will listen, set those up. And in October, when you're falling short on inquiries in aggregate or in certain key areas that mean that you're not going to hit these other goals, do something about it. Don't think it's just going to change overnight, and use the tools, the technology, whether it's a CRM or your modeling, but use the tools there to help you in real time create tactics and execute tactics that change that trajectory, especially if it's going down. If it's going up, find out why it's going up and double down on that.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, colleges and universities cannot afford to have sloppy practices, if you will, in the recruitment process. There's really little room for error. So using the technology, as Bill suggests, can help institutions focus in on areas of the country where students that they currently have come from. They can help them focus on students that have a much higher chance of enrolling versus students that don't. You don't want to focus your energy on students who aren't going to come or don't have a chance of coming. Using AI and machine learning for that is going to be, I think, if not a lifesaver, it's going to help institutions focus in very clearly on being efficient in the recruitment process.
Let's touch on that just a little bit, because this is the first time in our conversation that we've talked about AI and its impact. What are you seeing AI out there?
Well, I think one way that AI is being used is, and Bill referred to dashboard earlier, is to help admissions officers, boots on the ground people, focus on students who have the characteristics, if you will, to enroll. AI is also being used in other ways, like to answer questions, for example. And that's been for a while, but now it's much more sophisticated. But I would really be very, very clear that there is no substitution for human interaction, unless we think that technology is the answer for everything. Recently, NACAC's CEO, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, recently published an article about a quote unquote secret weapon to successfully recruit students. And that was, and he needed to say this, that was hospitality, making students and their families feel welcome and treating them with dignity and respect. There's nothing new there, but sometimes because we get so involved in the technology and our numbers are so great and the pressure is so high, sometimes we forget that we're dealing with people and individuals.
It's the personal touch.
I wanted to quickly connect Bob's comment about no substitute for human interaction. And when I think about AI and the tools to help admissions, AI can be predictive. It can go into a deep dive in your inquiry pool and create grades on the predictive likelihood of this individual applying. But it takes an individual, a real person, to then kind of unpack all of that. But it also, if it's properly used, it's prescriptive. It will help inform what do you need to do to change the predictive value that's been assigned to this student. And again, those are people, real people looking at it and saying, okay, here are the things we need to do over the next 2 weeks with this slice of our inquiry pool.
And AI can tell the admissions officers what those things are.
Yeah, exactly.
But then they have to carry it out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see the biggest impact coming from enrollment management right now? What are the things that folks can really do that are going to make a big difference?
I'm a regular listener to your podcast because I think they're really
Thank
good.
you.
Hopefully this stacks up well against previous performance. But I would say, I know you like the idea of the takeaway. What can a college president take away from all that we've discussed? And I would say number one is that the enrollment management leader needs obviously to be at the big table. And he or she needs to be well informed, about their own performance and predictive, and share that and help the leadership understand if it's not going in the right direction, what can we do about it? What do we need to do about it? What are our options? So I think that it's not a reactive role at all. It's really being the one who often sadly needs to bring, if not bad news, sobering news to the leadership, but with recommendations, with some action orientation. So that's what I would say, number one, the role of enrollment management now is.
And I would say it's up to us to work with our colleagues on the president's staff and the president to facilitate serious attention to what we call long game planning. That just means that, for me anyway, that we need to plan for different scenarios, like, major revenue hits, for example, or the decline in federal funding or enrollment hits, and to make contingency plans for those different scenarios.
Wait a minute. I'm hearing something that sounds very much like risk planning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And in fact, part of the plan is maybe we ought to pivot from what we're doing to doing something else that is going to be in demand, not only by the students out there, but by our nation. And you talked about workforce development a little bit earlier, Drumm. Then maybe we ought to plan for that as a contingency. And the bottom line for me in all of this planning, because people get nervous with planning, right? Is my job going to be cut? What does this mean for me? It's a new thing. It's change. Change is hard. Over communicate to establish trust. Involve selected faculty and staff in the planning. Don't make it just the major players in the administration. And to the extent possible, provide some periodic updates to the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are very critical. Doing strategy work, we talk about achieving a shared vision. And unless you involve your stakeholders in the development of it, you're not going to have a shared vision and nobody's going to execute in the same direction.
Right. Right. So those are our takeaways. Is there another one, Bill?
I think the most important thing is transparency. And we're hearing too often about, and I maybe dip into politics, that a jobs report wasn't good, so you fire the source, right? If your funnel report is not going the way you built it, talk about it. And I think good leadership is going to understand that's your role, that sometimes you're going to bring not so good news, but as I said earlier, bring some solutions. But I think staying really current with the real funnel realities, and especially this, we didn't talk much about the business officer in this, but Bob likes to say that enrollment management and the chief business officer are attached at the hip. He or she doesn't want to hear that you knew that things weren't looking so rosy, but you thought if we just wait a month and see how it turned out, it might be okay. That's sloppy. Over
the course of our consultancy in enrollment intelligence, now we worked with a client, and it was in the kind of mid to late spring time that all of a sudden realized that they weren't going to make their class. But we could have told them that 6 months ago by looking at the funnel report. Obviously, what we mean by that is how many prospects do you have? How many inquiries do you have? How many do you have in different schools? How many applicants do you eventually get? Because if the numbers are trending downward at the top of the funnel, you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to trend downward in terms of your enrollment. And the business officer could have been involved much earlier if they had been monitoring their funnel report.
Yeah. I've got a question, and this is just something that popped into my mind. What about these colleges and universities that are doing open enrollment, where they're sending letters out to people who are, quote, qualified?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
That's called direct admission, and basically states have adopted that. Some private schools have as well. But the bottom line is they look at test scores, they look at grades, and they push out an acceptance for all 13 of the state schools, for example, and then students have to choose between them. They know that they're in. They don't know what their financial aid is necessarily, although there was one college in the Midwest that's doing financial aid estimates early. Frankly, I'm not going to go with the mainstream on this. I'm a little concerned about that as a strategy, because one of the complaints now that we hear from students is, I get so much mail from colleges I never heard of. And if this is scaled up, the complaint will be, I get so many acceptances from colleges I never heard of. So I'm a little contrarian on that side, but I don't know. Bill, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of fool's gold. And I say this because, one of the enrollment management roles is to predict yield at different stages, right? And what direct admission is what we call a soft admit, somebody who didn't do any of the legwork to really understand our institution. So if this is going to work, it's going to take 3 to 5 years for colleges to determine the pattern of what happens when a kid is directly admitted and has no history with the institution. And how do you plan if you're not sure what the yield is going to be on these admits? And many will do it to say, hey, we've got so many seats open on this airplane. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I don't see it as a near-term solution to the long-term issue, or even a long-term solution to the realities we talked about today.
Yeah, a lot of people are hyped up about it, though.
Yep.
Oh, there are. You're seeing more and more of it out there. Another one just pops into my mind, Cavendish College, which is part of the University of Cambridge. I had Madeline Atkins on the program a while back, and they had the goal at Cambridge to admit 90% of their students from public institutions instead of the elite prep schools, et cetera. Cavendish did it. The way they did that was identifying promising students early on in their high school years and then working with them to make sure that they were ready. Have any institutions in the US started this? Has it been successful? And do you see this as a potential model?
My quick thing is, yes, there have been a lot of programs like that over the years, pipeline programs,
Questbridge. Yeah, not
Questbridge.
necessarily colleges and universities, although there have been some, mostly public institutions, that have worked with students at the high school level. But primarily that work has been done by what we call CBOs, community-based organizations.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is, if an institution decides to do that, I think that flies fully in the face of the political realities, right? Where DEI and most of these programs, if they're like the ones described, are going to, address students of color, students with economic shortcomings, et cetera. And according to the new playbook, if anything smells of giving special attention to underserved populations, it will endanger your access to federal funds.
I think we have a battle ahead of ourselves on that one. When you talk about trying to prepare underprepared students, there are white students in rural areas and in urban areas who are underprepared and who are low income. And I think it's important to show that we're serving all populations. But not all organizations are going to serve all populations. So if there's a CBO in, rural Missouri that's working with students of low socioeconomic status, and a majority of them are white, that's serving that population. And if someone is working with Philadelphia Futures in that city and they're serving primarily a Black population, because that's who's there. So I think we have many court battles ahead on this. The lawyers are going to benefit.
So, gents, we've talked about the 3 takeaways. We've talked about a few other things. Just to quickly summarize the 3 takeaways, folks need to be thinking about the long game planning. You've got to ensure your faculty and staff understand the value propositions that are being conveyed to your prospective students, that they're fully invested in the institution, and you've got to really be tracking the funnel performance. It was a great story that you gave a little while ago about being called in the spring when you could have made the call that they weren't going to make their numbers.
Right. Yeah, that's a great summary.
Yeah. What's next for you? You guys, you've been doing this for so long. I don't know if you're like me, where you're starting to contemplate retirement. Probably not. You're older than I am, but you got a heck of a lot more energy.
Well, I think, what's interesting, Drumm, Bob and I talk about this as we're, 5 years down with this and have had really wonderful clients of a variety. But I think, our role is we don't actively advertise. We feel like what we talked about today and last week are out there. And if somebody, an institution, thinks that we might bring value to their situation and the questions they have about immediate or longer term, we're around. But meanwhile, I think we both just keep reading voraciously on issues in higher education and K through 12 and try, like an AI, to stay current with the fast pace of technology that's being implemented at institutions. So we'll continue to work on that and answer the phone when it rings.
Yeah, and I think it's important to tell your listeners why Bill and I decided to partner together in this little firm that we have called Enrollment Intelligence now. We had long careers on college campuses. I was doing this work for 45 years. Bill would be just about as much, but he spent his first 4 years or so as a AP history teacher at a wonderful school in New Jersey. So, but combined, we have 85 years of on-campus experience, and we retired. I retired 6 years ago. Bill retired 5 years ago, and we just weren't ready to completely hang it up. Because this is exciting work. And believe me, it's more exciting now than it was when we were active, in terms of the political environment. But here is one thing I think that will set us apart. We will not work with more than one client at a time because we want to give that client our undivided attention. And we don't want to work 80 hours a week, but we do want to give 100% effort to the client. And it's just Bill and myself. And so if folks are interested in what we have to offer, our website is enrollmentintelligencenow.com, and that's a good way to get in touch with us.
And you guys are one of our very few strategic partners that we have at the Change Leader, and I want to acknowledge you and say thank you for that.
All right, well, thank you. And I would say finally, too, that a lot of work we do is in coaching and mentoring, and what we're seeing talk about long range, long term, and we didn't really address this in our earlier comments, was where is the leadership going to come from in enrollment management? A lot of focus is on presidents, as it should be, and academic leaders. But what we foresee is it's a shorter bench of people who have the kind of experience, politically in the lower P terms. So what we often do is help the new leader in real time manage, as Bob said, yes, an exciting, but also a very complex reality, particularly on campus and all that has to be done. So sometimes we just are there to be guides and saying, if I were in your seat right now, here's a couple things I would think about. And that has been a lot of fun for us, and I think of value to our clients.
It really is very valuable. And sometimes, when we have budget constraints, we say, well, I've hired a person who really has a lot of experience in admissions and financial aid. We'll make him or her the VP for enrollment management. They may know the technicalities, but not necessarily how to put them all together and how to lead in a way that will make the institution even more successful.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, like that old ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We are in interesting times right now, and I want to thank you both for being on the show, and even more so for the work that you're doing with so many colleges and universities out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Drumm.
Thanks so much, Drumm. Take care now.
You too. Folks, thanks for listening these past 2 sessions, and a special thank you to my guests Bill Conley and Bob Massa for their sharing with us higher ed enrollment, the challenges that they're facing, and what presidents and enrollment managers can do to change how they're operating and thinking in this new normal higher ed finds itself in. To my listeners, thanks as always for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.